Hi, and welcome to the Logic Final Project. I want to just kind of give a brief overview verbally for those of you who prefer that method. I'll give you a few pointers, so even if you don't like it, you might just play it in the background. But this is the Logic Project. It's also called the Logic Scavenger Hunt, is another name I have for it. And the idea is that when people make arguments, whether it be like they're trying to persuade you of a position like an opinion page of a newspaper or on Facebook or Twitter or somewhere, where they're trying to make a point, or they're emailing you to make an argument, or you're just reading a magazine, or you're reading a website, or you're watching TV or whatever, right? People make arguments. And so they're going to employ some of the devices that we have learned about in this course. And sometimes people will use fallacies. Sometimes they'll use deductive reasoning, sometimes they use inductive reasoning, and your job is to find examples of this in the world, is basically what it is. And that demonstrates you understand the concepts because you are able to find those concepts while you're engaged in social media. One of the things that I find is, like, when you do like the fallacies unit, oftentimes people will at the end of the fallacies unit be like, oh, you're using a fallacy, and they're able to point them out in people. Now, people don't like it when you point out fallacies, but when you first learn them, I think it's common that you see them, and then you're like, oh, you're doing an ad hominem, or you're doing a red herring, or you're those kinds of things. Not exactly the ideal way to make friends and keep them, but it is something that oftentimes happens when you study philosophy, fallacies, and when you study anything. I mean, it's just you notice things you didn't notice before. And so, that's basically what I'm asking you to do, is to show that, as you're engaging in life, that you're kind of looking out for these things and you're finding them. So the best way to do this is kind of just throughout the semesters. We finish a module, you learn some new concepts, look back at this, and then say, okay, well, let me see if I can see any of these. And when you find one, you write it down and you save a copy. You cut it out. You can, take a picture of it and throw it into a Word document. I allow people to turn these in physically if they want, but mostly nowadays people prefer just to turn them in online. They're perfectly comfortable just adding a photo through snap a photo with their phone if it's print, or just do a screenshot if it's on the computer, and they're perfectly fine with just shoving that in and then doing it that way. But what I want you to basically do is to cut out the item, paste on it, and then explain to me what fallacy is being committed, or what if it's deductive or inductive, how the example works, what the example is, and basically you give the definition, you give how this one meets it, and then you give the example, and then you have a citation, and that's all it is. And you have 40 of these. People oftentimes ask, don't wait to the very end of the semester. Just kind of do it as you go along, because you'll be observing these, and that's the idea, is as you go along. You might set aside an hour or two after you learn some stuff and just say, well, let me think if I can think of places I see these, and do that type of thing. As far as it goes, people oftentimes say, where do you find them? And I'd say, the opinion page of a newspaper is a great place, because people are making arguments, since they'll have fallacies, they'll have argument types, you'll see things like that. Cartoons are good, because oftentimes they use linguistic devices like amphibole, equivocation. They use ad hominems, red herrings, in order to kind of amuse people. So comics are really great places to find them. Cartoons, like the cartoon section of a newspaper, magazine, online, wherever. Memes are great. Just go. But Facebook, Twitter, whatever social media you like, are all great places to find examples of this, because people are making arguments. They're trying to make a point. They're trying to tell people stuff. They're coming up with funny memes to, make a point about something. And then oftentimes those encapsulate the things we have learned in this course. Now, as far as it goes, what I do ask is, I ask that Google the term. Because what happens is, if you just Google the term, I know the fallacies that will come up with the terms. I don't, it doesn't demonstrate your ability to understand these concepts if what you do is you simply go out and Google red herring, and then you go, oh, here's a red herring on the page that says logicalfallacies.com/red herring, right? That doesn't demonstrate that you know what a red herring is. That demonstrates your ability to type a word in and then copy and paste, okay? And I want a little bit deeper understanding and learning. And so what happens is, you do not do that. If you do that, I don't give you credit for those examples. You might say, well, how do you know? Well, usually I know because people use the same examples. Like I'll have 2 or 3 people use the same examples. I've done this enough times now that I've seen enough projects that I know these examples with a little bit of I mean, I can tell you pretty much, the flying spaghetti meatball monster is, kind of, I mean, that, like a picture of that, or, Abe Lincoln as a ball or something like that. These are all images that I've seen many times that have come from those sites. So don't just Google it. However, what I do is I do allow for half the examples can be from you finding them yourself, but the other half you can make up. So if you go out and you are thinking like ad hominem, what's an ad hominem? Ad hominem is where you attack the person rather than their argument. So you're like, well, we shouldn't trust Joe. He's no good, blah, 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 right? Well, that's an ad hominem. You're not really attacking his argument. You're attacking him himself, right? And that's what we call an ad hominem. And so maybe you have that concept. So what you do is you then say, oh, example this, and then you make up the example. And that would be perfectly fine and perfectly acceptable. As far as, the other thing is when you do that, if you're going to make them up, what I would suggest is find examples first, try to find 20 examples, then make up the others. Because there are certain things that are easier to find. Like ad hominems are not really ones you'd probably want to make up because those are easy to find. But something like an equivocation, maybe, or a slippery slope, or a red herring, maybe those are a little bit more complicated. I don't know. But the case is you can make up half of them. And the reason why I allow you to make up half of them is because if you look up the term, you understand the term, you look at some examples, then you make up your own, you are demonstrating the ability to understand those concepts, which is what I am looking for. That's the whole purpose of the project. Now, as far as examples go, people say, well, citation, what does that mean? Well, if you had a conversation with like your kid, your mother, your husband, something like that, and you're using an example of like the time your husband used some crazy fallacy or crazy arguments type that you want to show, that's fine. I like that. I mean, that's interesting. It's sometimes kind of fun, and you're like, somebody has an interesting home life. But I could probably have done that in the past, or probably could still do that with people I know. Anyway, but the case is that if you do come up with examples from like television or conversations, things that are not, or you overhear something at the grocery store, things like that, if you come up with examples like that, I'm fine with that. But then the question is, well, how do I cite that, right? I mean, how do you cite something that you got from, the grocery store? Well, what I would do is I would suggest you maybe keep track of the date, maybe the people involved, give me some context. Obviously I don't need to know everybody's name. I don't need to know where it happened, location. I don't need to verbatim, but I do need as much information just sort of to substantiate it. That way I know you're not just making it up. And that's all I'm asking for. So citation might be personal experience, conversation with my mom or something like that, or personal experience at Hy-Vee on in December. So that would be the way I would do that. I'm not real particular. I just kind of want to know where they came from as a citation with real life ones. With television, sometimes you can look up the episode number and actually give a legitimate legitimate MLA citation, and that would be great. As you look at the sheet, if you go down the page, there's 3 or 4 sheets. There's a sheet that there's an example of what one might look like. There's an example of a table of contents. There's a list of all the fallacies with an example of each one and the definition of them. You can use those definitions on the actual project. If you want to use those, that's fine. And then but there's also categories like deduction, induction. And what you'll find like in like the deduction category, it'll say like minimum, and it'll say like 5 and maximum 12 or something like that. I forget the number exactly offhand and I don't have it open, and I don't want to take and change the screen on my computer while I'm making this video. But basically what I'm saying is like if there's a minimum, so it says 5, well then you need to have at least 5 in that category. So then you go to induction, it has 5 as a minimum. Fallacies has maybe 12 as a, and you go through all these. Well, the problem is if you do the minimum, you'll only have like 20 some examples, right? So you're going to have to go above the minimum. And so in some of the categories you can do it, but I don't want all the other extras, all the beyond the 23, all the other 17 or 18 to be fallacies. I would like maybe a couple of them to be maybe like 7 or 8 deduction, 7 or 8 induction. But if you want to do 12 deduction, 12 induction, that's fine as long as you don't go above the maximum. The other thing is that I do ask that if the minimum is 5, that you use 5. Like so in deduction, I want an argument from math, argument from definition, scientific evidence, argument based on definition. I think maybe I use that one. Things like that, categorical ideas, things like that. And so, what I would like for you to do is, if you use those methods, or if you use those, use at least one from at least 5 different categories. There's usually like 8 to 10 in a category if there were 5. And so, you can use one of each. But then if you want to use a second one of that same one, and you want to use 2 arguments from definition, that's fine. But just don't make, you have 5 total, and 2 of them are arguments from definition, 2 of them are arguments from math, and one is, a categorical syllogism or something like that. I would like for there to be 5 unique types, and then add on. Then as far as, I don't want, like, if I would like no more of any category. Like if you're in fallacies and you have ad hominem, I don't want 15 ad hominems. I want 2, 3 ad hominems at most. I'll say 3 at the most. 2 would be ideal. Just sort of, that way we have more variation. It shows your ability to understand more concepts. As far as things I ask, if you want to submit it in person, you can. But I always say keep it neat and clean. Don't, make sure everything's neat. Everything's on its own page. Everything's nicely categorized, nicely organized. Everything's clean. That's a big part of it. I mean, that's part of it is, even if you're having trouble, if you can put in the time and effort to make this look like a good project, that goes a long way. Because if you've had struggled at other times, this can be a good grade saver. If you aren't putting in the time and effort, this isn't a hard project. It's just time. And if you aren't putting in the time throughout the semester, it's going to be demonstrated here. But if you're putting in the time, but you're just not getting the logical concepts, then it's going to show that it's not that you're not a hard worker. It's just, you just didn't get the logical concepts. I think that's about it. Oh, the only other thing is there is a due date on it at the end of the semester, that basically, like, it is due at the end of the day, and I'm serious, like, that is the deadline, because I have to get grades in, and I'll have 40, 50 of these projects to grade, and they can take, even if I'm just flying through them, they do take some time to grade. It'll take me, at least a full day, and everybody wants them done, preferably before the weekend, of the, whenever finals end, but that doesn't always happen, but I do need the time, and so if you turn it in late, I'm not really very sympathetic, and I oftentimes just won't even accept it. So sometimes I will close the course, and that way people can't submit them anymore, and it's maybe a little bit of a tough move, but that is what I do. Now, sometimes we will have a problem, and if you're having trouble submitting, you can email me. As long as you can get it to me fairly quickly, I'm usually okay on that, but it has to be a pretty extreme circumstance. But I will tell you that on many occasions we've had Blackboard issues during the last day, or there's been a big storm come through, and so I do understand that those things happen, but that deadline is the deadline. All right, if you have any questions, email me. If you want to submit something early for me to take a look at, I'm always happy to take a look.